past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. I don't mean philosophically, I mean physically. Right now, this moment, is the only thing that's real. The past is just a pattern in your neurons, and the future is just a word we use for what we think will probably happen based on patterns we remember. And yet you spend your entire life haunted by one and paralyzed by the other. Why? Because nobody ever taught you what time actually is. It's not a river you're floating down. It's not a dimension you move through. It's a trick, a beautiful, useful, absolutely necessary trick your brain plays using entropy and memory. And when you see through the trick, you don't lose time. You gain something much more important. You stop being afraid of it. Now I know what you're thinking. Feynman, that sounds like word games. Of course the past exists. I remember it. Of course the future exists. It's coming whether I like it or not. And I get it. That's how it feels. But feelings aren't facts, and what I'm about to show you is going to completely reframe how you understand time, memory, regret, anxiety, and what it means to be alive in this exact moment. Here's what you're going to get from this video that you can't get anywhere else. You've been told your whole life to let go of the past and don't worry about the future, right? But nobody ever explained to you why the past and future are fundamentally different things. Not psychologically different, not spiritually different, physically different. And once you understand the real reason, the physics behind it, the mathematics, the way entropy and probability actually work, you're going to stop carrying guilt and anxiety like they're just inevitable parts of being human. Because here's the lie we've all been sold: that time flows, that there's some cosmic river carrying you from past to future, and you're just a leaf floating along, unable to do anything about where you've been or where you're going. But that's not what time is. Time doesn't flow. There is no universal clock pushing the universe forward. What actually exists is a universe that started in an impossibly unlikely, incredibly organized, low-entropy state. We call it the Big Bang. And since then, it's been gradually, statistically, inevitably exploring all the different ways things can be more mixed up, more spread out, more disordered. The arrow of time, the reason you can remember yesterday but not tomorrow, the reason eggs break but don't unbreak, the reason you can't undo your mistakes. That arrow is just entropy increasing. That's it. That's the whole secret. And when you really understand that, when you feel it in your bones, suddenly regret stops feeling like a moral failing, and anxiety stops feeling like reasonable preparation for the future. They're both just side effects of being a conscious creature living in a universe with an entropy gradient. So what I'm going to do is walk you through this. Not with complicated equations, though the math is beautiful if you want to dig into it later, but with stories, with images, with things you can see and feel and understand. I'm going to show you what entropy really is, why it only increases in one direction, and what that means for your life, for your memories, for your choices, for every single moment you're beating yourself up about something you did or didn't do, or tying yourself in knots about something that might or might not happen. And by the end, you're going to have a completely different relationship with time. Not because I've given you some spiritual practice or positive thinking exercise, but because you'll understand, really understand, what time actually is and what it isn't. You'll see that the prison you think you're in, the one where you're haunted by the past and frozen by the future, that prison never had any walls. You've just been reading the map upside down your whole life. So let's start with something simple, something you've seen 1,000 times but probably never really looked at. An egg. When I was working at Los Alamos during the war, we had terrible coffee. Really just awful, the kind of coffee that makes you question your life choices. But every morning I'd be in that kitchen, and I'd crack an egg into a pan, and I'd watch it cook. And I'd think about time. Now, you might be thinking, Feynman, you need better hobbies. But stay with me, because this egg contains the entire mystery of why the past is different from the future. You crack an egg. The shell breaks. The yolk spills out, this perfect golden sphere. The white spreads across the pan, this clear, viscous liquid. You turn on the heat. The heat spreads through the liquid. The proteins start to denature. The clear part turns white. The yolk solidifies. Each of these steps completely irreversible. You've never seen an egg unbreak itself. You've never seen a cooked egg spontaneously turn back into a raw egg, the white becoming clear again, the yolk becoming liquid, the whole thing leaping back into a perfectly formed shell. Never, not once in the history of the universe has anyone seen that happen. Now here's where it gets really interesting. If I could track every single molecule in that egg, every atom in the shell, every protein in the white, every lipid in the yolk, every air molecule around it, every atom in the metal pan, every electron in the heating element. If I could track all of that, the equations governing their motion work perfectly backward in time. Newton's laws? Time symmetric. Quantum mechanics? Time symmetric. Even Einstein's general relativity? Time symmetric. What that means is this. If you could somehow reverse every velocity, every momentum, every quantum state, if you could flip the entire microscopic configuration, those same laws would describe the cooked egg spontaneously gathering itself back into a shell. The heat would flow back into the stove, the proteins would fold back into their original configurations, the crack would seal itself up, and you'd have a raw egg again. The laws of physics allow this. There's nothing in the fundamental equations that says eggs must only break forward in time. Nothing. But it will never happen. Not in 1 billion years. Not in 1 trillion years. Not if you sat there watching eggs for longer than the universe has existed. Why? Because there are so many more ways for an egg to be broken than unbroken. So many more ways for energy to be spread out than concentrated. So many more ways for proteins to be denatured than folded in that one specific original configuration. That's entropy. That's all it is. It's not some mysterious cosmic force. It's not the universe moving toward disorder like it has a preference. It's just statistics. It's just probability playing out over unimaginably large numbers of particles. Think about it this way. Imagine you have a deck of cards. 52 cards, perfectly ordered. Ace through king, hearts, diamonds, clubs, spades. A beautiful, organized sequence. Now shuffle it once. Really shuffle it. The cards are now in some random order. Here's the thing. There are more than 8 times 10 to the 67th different ways to arrange a deck of cards. That's more than the number of atoms in the Milky Way galaxy. More than the number of stars in the observable universe. Which means when you shuffle that deck, you've created an arrangement that has almost certainly never existed before in all of human history, and will almost certainly never exist again. The specific sequence of cards in your hand right now is unique in all of space and time. Now imagine trying to shuffle the deck back to its original order. Ace through king, hearts, diamonds, clubs, spades. You could shuffle once a second for the entire age of the universe, and you would never get it back. Not because it's impossible, the laws governing how cards move don't forbid it, but because there's only one ordered arrangement, and there are 10 to the 67 disordered arrangements. The ordered state isn't special to the universe, it's only special to us, because we're the ones who decided that ace through king by suit counts as ordered. To the universe, every arrangement is just an arrangement. But to us, we recognize that there are vastly more ways to be shuffled than ordered. That's entropy. The measure of how many different microscopic arrangements correspond to the same macroscopic state. And the reason entropy increases, the reason eggs break and don't unbreak, the reason rooms get messy and don't spontaneously clean themselves, the reason you age and don't get younger, is because there are so many more high entropy states than low entropy states that probability overwhelmingly favors moving toward them. But notice what I just said. It's probability. It's statistics. It's not a law that says thou shalt not decrease entropy. It's just that decreasing entropy requires all the particles to conspire together in exactly the right way, and the odds of that happening by chance are so infinitesimally small that we can treat it as impossible. Now, here's where this connects to your life, to your past, to your future, to every moment of regret you've ever felt, and every moment of anxiety about what's coming. Your worst mistake, the thing you did that you wish you could take back, the relationship you ruined, the opportunity you missed, the words you said that you can't unsay. That's the broken egg. And you're standing there thinking, why can't I just uncook this? Why can't I go back and do it differently? And the answer everybody gives you is some version of, because time only moves forward, or because you can't change the past, or because that's just how life works. But those aren't answers. They're just restatements of the question. They don't tell you why. Here's why. That moment when you made that choice, that was a specific configuration of matter and energy. Your brain was in a specific state. The neurons firing, the neurotransmitters flowing, the memories accessible to you at that moment, the emotional state you were in, the information you had. All of it was a particular, unique arrangement of atoms and molecules and electrical signals. That configuration no longer exists. The atoms that made up those neurons have been replaced. The electrical patterns have dispersed. The neurotransmitters have been recycled. The state of your brain that made that choice has dissipated into higher entropy configurations. It's not that you can't go back in time. It's that the low entropy state that was you making that choice has dissolved into the universe's relentless exploration of higher entropy states. Going back would require taking all those scattered particles, all that dispersed energy, all those changed neural configurations, and putting them back into exactly the state they were in at that moment. And that's not going back in time. That's decreasing entropy over a massive system, and probability says not going to happen. You're not trapped by time, you're trapped by entropy. Or rather, you think you're trapped, but you're not. Because here's the thing, and this is crucial, you're not that person anymore. Not because time has passed, but because you're literally made of different atoms in different configurations, with different information encoded in different neural patterns. The you that made that choice is as gone as the unbroken egg. You're the cooked egg now, or rather, you're a different egg entirely. And that's not a metaphor. That's physics. Now let me give you another picture, another way of seeing this that might make it even clearer. Imagine you walk into a child's room, toys scattered everywhere, Legos on the floor, books flung open, stuffed animals in a pile, clothes everywhere, crayons rolled under the furniture. Total chaos, right? You know immediately what happened. A kid was here. A kid played here. A kid made a mess. Now imagine you leave the room. You close the door. You come back 5 minutes later, and the toys are on the shelf. The books are stacked neatly. The clothes are folded. The crayons are back in the box. The room is perfectly clean. What do you think happened? Someone cleaned it. Obviously. You don't think, oh, the air molecules must have randomly bounced all the toys onto the shelf and pushed the clothes into neat, folded piles. That would be absurd. That would be insane. Why? Why is that absurd? The air molecules are bouncing around according to laws that work the same forward and backward. In principle, they could conspire to push everything into an organized state. The laws of physics don't forbid it. But it's not going to happen. Why? Because there are 10 billion different ways the room can be messy, and maybe only 100 different ways it can be clean by your definition. The probability of random motion organizing things is so breathtakingly low that you can safely say it will never happen. And this, right here, is the key to understanding the arrow of time. The past is the clean room. The future is the messy room. Not because time moves toward mess, not because the universe wants disorder, but because there are vastly, overwhelmingly, incomprehensibly more messy states than organized states, and the universe is just exploring them all statistically. Your life started in a low entropy state, not at your birth, at the Big Bang. The entire universe was in this incredibly unlikely, highly organized, low entropy state. Everything compressed into an unimaginably small space. All the matter and energy organized in this particular way. Why? Nobody knows. That's the big mystery. But it happened. And since then, the universe has been spreading out. Matter dispersing, energy spreading, particles exploring all the different configurations they can be in. And that process, that spreading, that exploration, that's what we call time passing. But it's not time passing. It's entropy increasing. Time isn't doing anything. Entropy is just statistically doing what it's overwhelmingly likely to do, and you're part of that process. Every choice you make, every relationship you have, every success and every failure, it's all entropy exploring state space. You're not fighting against time. You're participating in a statistical process that started 13.8 billion years ago and is still unfolding. The pain you feel when you think about the past, that ache, that regret, that sense of, if only I could go back, that's not because you failed. That's not because you're broken. That's because you're a conscious creature with memory living in a universe where entropy increases. And you're trying to hold yourself to a standard that the universe itself doesn't obey. You were never supposed to keep the room clean forever. You were never supposed to prevent the egg from breaking. You were never supposed to stop entropy from increasing. You were just supposed to be alive, to participate, to be part of the process. And when you understand that, really understand it, the nature of regret changes. It doesn't disappear. I'm not telling you you'll never feel bad about things you've done, but it stops being this crushing weight. It stops being this sense that you've fundamentally failed at the basic task of being human. Because you haven't. You've just been trying to reverse entropy with your bare hands, and nobody told you that's not actually possible. Now, I can hear you asking, okay, Feynman, but what about the future? If everything is just entropy increasing, doesn't that mean the future is already determined? Doesn't that mean I have no control? This is where people get really tangled up. So let me be as clear as I can be. The laws of physics are deterministic in classical mechanics, probabilistic in quantum mechanics, but in both cases they're time-symmetric. If I know the exact state of every particle right now, and I know the laws, I can in principle calculate what state they'll be in at any future moment, and I can also calculate what state they were in at any past moment. But here's what that doesn't mean. It doesn't mean the future is already written in some book somewhere. It doesn't mean your choices don't matter. It doesn't mean you're just a puppet going through predetermined motions. Why? Because you are part of the system. Your brain, your neurons, your thoughts, these aren't separate from the universe. They're not little souls floating above the physical world, watching helplessly. They are the universe. They are matter and energy arranged in a particular way, obeying the same laws as everything else. When you make a choice, that's the universe exploring state space. That's entropy increasing in a particular way based on the configuration of your brain at that moment. Your choice isn't separate from the physics. It is the physics. And here's the beautiful thing. Quantum mechanics adds genuine randomness. Not just we don't know randomness, but actual fundamental built-into reality randomness. And chaos theory tells us that even in deterministic systems, tiny differences in initial conditions blow up into completely unpredictable outcomes. What this means is that the future is genuinely open, not in some mystical, magical sense, in a physical, mathematical sense. The equations tell us how things could evolve, not how they will evolve. There are multiple possible futures, all consistent with the laws, and which one actually happens depends on quantum randomness, chaotic sensitivity, and yes, your choices. Because your choices are part of the system. They're not violations of the laws, They're expressions of them. So when I say the future doesn't exist, I mean it literally. There's no future sitting out there waiting for you to arrive at it. There's only this moment, and the probabilistic possibilities for how it could evolve into the next moment, based on the current configuration and the laws of physics. The anxiety you feel about the future, that knot in your stomach, that racing mind, that sense of dread, that's not you being prepared. That's you running simulations in your head of possible high-entropy future states and emotionally reacting to them as if they're real. But they're not real. They're models. They're predictions. They're your brain's best guess based on patterns it's extracted from past experiences. And your brain is really good at that. That's what brains do. That's how we survive. But just because your brain is good at predicting doesn't mean those predictions are glimpses of a real future that's out there waiting. The future you're anxious about doesn't exist. It's a simulation, a model, a guess. And even if your guess is good, even if you're right about what's likely to happen, that future won't feel like the future when it arrives. It'll feel like now, just like this moment feels like now. And in that now, you'll make choices. You'll respond. You'll be a different version of you, in a different entropy state, with different information. And that version of you will deal with whatever is actually happening, not the simulation you're running right now. So the question isn't, how do I control the future? The question is, how do I shape the probabilities from this moment, right now? Because that you can do. That's what agency is, not control over the future. Influence over how entropy unfolds from here. You can't determine what will happen, but you can make some states more likely and other states less likely by your actions now. That's not control. But it's not helplessness either. It's participation. And it's enough. Let me tell you about memory now, because this is where things get really interesting, and it's the key to understanding why the past feels so real and so fixed. Your memory is not a recording. It's not like you have a little video camera in your head that recorded everything that happened, and now you can play it back. That's not how memory works at all. Memory is a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain is rebuilding it from pieces. Fragments of sensory data, emotional associations, conceptual frameworks, narrative structures. It's taking all these pieces and assembling them into what feels like a coherent memory of what happened. But here's the crucial thing. That assembly happens now, in the present, in your current brain state, with your current knowledge, with your current emotional state, with your current beliefs about yourself and the world. Which means every time you remember something, you're not accessing the past. You're constructing a model of the past based on current information, and that model is always influenced by the present. Studies have shown this over and over. People's memories change, not because they're lying, not because they're unreliable, but because memory is reconstructive, and reconstruction is influenced by current state. You remember an argument differently when you're still angry versus when you've forgiven the person. You remember a success differently when you're confident versus when you're doubting yourself. You remember a traumatic event differently when you feel safe versus when you feel threatened. The past hasn't changed. The past doesn't exist to change. But your model of the past, that's constantly being updated, constantly being rebuilt, constantly being influenced by who you are now. And here's why this matters from a physics perspective. Memory only works in one direction, because entropy only increases in one direction. You can remember the past because low entropy states leave traces. A footprint in sand is a low entropy configuration. It requires energy and organization to create. And it persists for a while because the sand doesn't spontaneously organize itself into different patterns. Your neural patterns are the same. A memory is a particular configuration of synaptic strengths, of neural pathways, of protein expressions in your brain cells. That's a low entropy state. It took energy to create. the energy you spent paying attention, encoding the experience, consolidating the memory during sleep. And that low entropy state persists because, like the footprint, it doesn't spontaneously reorganize itself. But it does gradually degrade. It does get influenced by new information. It does get overwritten, partially, by new memories. The entropy of your memory systems is slowly, gradually increasing. The signal is getting noisier. The pattern is getting fuzzier. That's why old memories are hazier than recent ones. Not because time is fading them like old photographs, but because the entropy of the neural configurations encoding them is gradually increasing, and your brain has to work harder to reconstruct a coherent memory from a more degraded signal. Now here's the powerful part. If memory is reconstruction, and reconstruction happens in the present, then you have more power over your relationship with the past than you thought. You can't change the events. The configuration of matter and energy that was the event has dissolved. It's gone. But you can change the model. You can change how you encode it. You can change what you emphasize. You can change the emotional weight. You can change the story you tell about it. That's not delusion. That's not denial. It's recognizing that the past you're relating to isn't the event itself. It's a model. And models can be updated. This is why therapy works, why forgiveness works, why people can heal from the past even though they can't change what happened. They're not changing what happened. They're changing the model. They're re-encoding the memory with different emotional valences, different cognitive frameworks, different meanings. And because the model is what you actually relate to, not the event itself, changing the model changes your experience. The past you're suffering over is not the past that happened. It's the past your current brain is reconstructing. And that means you have agency, not over the events, but over the model, over the story, over the meaning. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Let me give you an example from my own life. When I was young, I had this moment with my father. We were walking, and I said something, I don't even remember what, something dismissive about philosophy, about thinking too much about things that don't matter. And my father stopped. He looked at me, and he said something I didn't understand at the time. He said, "Richard, if you only think about what's useful, you'll miss what's true. And sometimes what's true is the most useful thing there is." For years, I remembered that as a criticism, as my father telling me I was being shallow. I encoded it with shame, with a sense of having disappointed him. And every time I thought about it, that's what I felt. Shame. But decades later, after my father had died, after I'd spent my life trying to understand what's true, I reconstructed that memory. Same words, same moment, but different meaning. I realized he wasn't criticizing me. He was inviting me. He was opening a door. He was saying, "Richard, there's more to think about than you realize, and it's wonderful." The event didn't change. My father still said those words. I still felt what I felt in that moment. But the model changed. The way I encoded it changed. The emotional weight changed. The narrative changed. And now, when I remember it, I don't feel shame. I feel gratitude. I feel love. I feel connection to my father across the years, across the entropy that has scattered the atoms that made up his body, across the dissolution of the low entropy state that was him. That's the power of understanding memory as reconstruction. You're not changing reality. You're updating your model to be more accurate, more complete, more true to what actually matters. And that brings me to presence, to now, to this moment. Every spiritual teacher, every mindfulness guru, every self-help book tells you to be present, and they're right, but usually for reasons that are vague and mystical and not particularly compelling if you're a skeptical, scientifically minded person. So let me give you the physics reason, the reason that has nothing to do with spirituality and everything to do with what's actually real. You should be present because the present is the only entropy state that exists. The past is a model, a reconstruction in your current neural patterns. The future is a simulation, a prediction based on patterns you've extracted. But this moment, right now, this is the actual configuration of matter and energy in the universe. This is what's real. When you're lost in rumination, when you're replaying that argument from 3 years ago, when you're beating yourself up about that choice you made, you're not interacting with the past. You can't. The past doesn't exist. You're running a model in your head, generating emotions based on that model, and suffering as a result. When you're lost in anxiety, when you're catastrophizing about what might happen, when you're running through all the worst-case scenarios, you're not preparing for the future. The future doesn't exist to prepare for. You're running simulations in your head, generating emotions based on those simulations, and suffering as a result. In both cases, you're suffering over something that isn't real, over models and simulations, over reconstructions and predictions, over patterns in your neurons, not over actual configurations of matter and energy in the world. Presence isn't peace. It's not some blissed-out state where nothing bothers you. It's accuracy. It's the recognition that this, right now, is what's actually happening. This is the only entropy state you can actually interact with. And when you're here, fully here, attending to what's actually present rather than what you're modeling or simulating, something shifts. Not because you've achieved some spiritual attainment, but because you've stopped fighting ghosts. The past you're regretting? Ghost. A model in your head. The future you're fearing? Ghost. A simulation you're running. This moment? Real. The only thing that's real. And in this moment, you can choose, you can act, you can respond, you can influence how the next moment unfolds. You can't change the past. It doesn't exist to change. You can't control the future. It doesn't exist to control. But you can participate in the present. You can be part of how entropy unfolds from here. That's not control. But it's not helplessness. It's agency in the only place agency is actually possible. Right here. Right now. Let me tell you what this means practically. Because it's all well and good to understand the physics, but if it doesn't change how you live, what's the point? Next time you feel regret, try this. Don't fight the feeling. Don't tell yourself you shouldn't feel it. But notice what you're doing. You're running a model of a past event. You're reconstructing it with your current knowledge, your current emotional state, your current understanding of consequences. And then say to yourself, as a fact, not as a mantra, that was a lower entropy state. It no longer exists. I am in a higher entropy state now, and I have different information. You're not excusing yourself. You're not saying the harm wasn't real if there was harm. You're recognizing that the configuration of matter and energy that was you at that moment included less information than you have now. You made a choice based on the state you were in. That state is gone. You're not that person anymore. You're this person, in this moment, with this information, and this person can make different choices, can act differently, can repair harm if harm was done, can learn, can grow, can be part of the entropy increase in a different way. That's not avoiding responsibility. That's contextualizing it accurately. You were not a soul making free choices independent of physical law. You were a physical system in a particular state, evolving according to probabilistic rules. And now you're in a different state. And this state can evolve differently. When you're anxious, try this. Notice what you're doing. You're running simulations. Your brain is predicting possible future states based on patterns from past states. And you're emotionally reacting to those simulations as if they're real. But they're not real. They're predictions, guesses, models. And most anxiety, not all but most, is catastrophizing. It's your brain latching onto one particularly negative possibility out of thousands of possible futures and treating it as if it's the only option. So ask yourself, what specific entropy state am I simulating? What exact configuration am I predicting? Write it down if you can. Get specific. And then ask, what's the probability of this exact configuration occurring? Out of all the possible ways the future could unfold, how likely is this one? Most of the time, you'll realize you're treating a very low probability event as if it's inevitable. You're collapsing the wave function of possible futures onto one unlikely negative outcome and then suffering as if it's already happened. But it hasn't happened. And it probably won't. And even if something bad does happen, it probably won't be the exact configuration you're imagining. It'll be different. And you'll respond to what actually happens, not to the simulation you're running now. Anxiety shrinks when you remember. The future is not one thing coming at you. It's a probability space, a distribution of possible outcomes. And you're influencing that distribution by your actions now. You can't control which outcome you get. But you can shift the probabilities. You can make better outcomes more likely and worse outcomes less likely. That's all you can do. But it's enough. And then there's presence. Once a day, just stop. Stop whatever you're doing, stop whatever you're thinking about. And ask, what is the actual entropy state I'm in right now? Not what you remember, not what you're predicting. What is here? Your body. The sensation of breathing, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the temperature of the air, the sounds around you, the light, the smells, the actual sensory data coming in right now. This isn't meditation. It's not a spiritual practice. It's scientific observation. You're training your brain to recognize that the present moment is the only real entropy configuration, and everything else is modeling. And the more you do this, the less power the past and future have over you. Not because you've transcended them, but because you've recognized them for what they are. Useful models and simulations that your brain creates, but not reality itself. Reality is this. Right now. This configuration. This moment. And in this moment, you're not broken. You're not trapped. You're not failing. You're just here. Being. Participating in the universe's exploration of state space. Being part of the increase in entropy. Living. Now let me talk about free will for a moment, because this is where people get really uncomfortable. If everything is just particles following laws, if entropy is just statistical probability playing out, then what room is there for choice, for agency, for moral responsibility? This is an old question. Philosophers have been arguing about it for thousands of years. But let me give you the physicist's answer, which I think is more satisfying than most of the philosophical ones. Free will is not the freedom to violate the laws of physics. It's not some magical ability to act independently of cause and effect. That's not even coherent. If your choices weren't caused by anything, if they were truly random, truly disconnected from your values, your knowledge, your desires, that wouldn't be free will. That would be chaos. That would be meaningless noise. Free will is the ability of a complex system, your brain, to process information, model outcomes, evaluate options based on encoded preferences, and output a decision. That whole process is physical. It's neurons firing. It's neurotransmitters binding. It's electrical signals propagating. It's all governed by the laws of physics. But it's also genuinely you, because you are not some separate soul piloting a meat robot. You are the pattern. You are the information processing system. You are the configuration of matter and energy that is doing the choosing. When you make a choice, that's not you overriding the laws of physics. That's you expressing them. Your brain is a physical system, and what it does is what physical systems do. But it's a very special kind of physical system. It's a system that models itself, that predicts futures, that evaluates outcomes, that updates its own rules based on experience. And that's enough for moral responsibility. Because when we hold people responsible, we're not asking whether they could have violated the laws of physics. We're asking whether their action flowed from their values, their knowledge, their decision-making process. We're asking whether they're the kind of system that can update its behavior based on feedback. A rock rolling down a hill isn't morally responsible for what it hits because it's not modeling, evaluating, or learning. It's just following gravity. But you are modeling, evaluating, and learning. Your actions flow from a complex process that includes your values, your understanding, your goals. And that process can change based on feedback, on consequences, on reflection. That's moral agency, not the ability to transcend physical law, but the ability to be a physical system complex enough to genuinely care about outcomes and adjust behavior accordingly. So when you made that choice you regret? Yes, it was physically determined by your brain state at that moment. But your brain state included your values, your knowledge, your emotional state, all of which were shaped by your entire history. You're not off the hook, but you're also not some kind of cosmic failure. You're a physical system that was in a particular state and evolved according to law, and now you're in a different state. And this state can learn, can update, can choose differently next time. Not because you've gained some magical free will you didn't have before, but because you're a system that processes information and changes its own rules. That's what brains do. That's what you are. Let me tell you about memory one more time, because I want to make sure you really get this. It's one of the most powerful things you can understand. Every painful memory you have, every moment of shame, of regret, of embarrassment, of loss, that memory exists only in your current brain. The event itself is gone, dissolved, scattered into higher entropy configurations. The atoms that made up that moment have been reused by the universe countless times. The energy has been redistributed. The information has been degraded. What you're relating to is a reconstruction. And that reconstruction is always happening now, in this brain state, with this information, with this emotional context, which means you have more power than you thought. You can't change the event, but you can change the reconstruction. You can change what you emphasize, what you attend to, what story you tell about it, what meaning you extract. This is not positive thinking. This is not just look on the bright side. This is recognizing that memory is not a photograph. It's a painting. And every time you remember, you're repainting it with your current brushes, your current colors, your current style, and if the painting is making you suffer, you can change how you paint it. Not by lying, not by denying what happened, but by seeing it more completely, by including context you've ignored, by recognizing complexity you've flattened, by extending compassion to past you that you've been withholding. The past you that made that choice was working with less information, was in a different emotional state, was shaped by different experiences, was literally a different physical configuration. That person did the best they could with what they had. Maybe that wasn't very good. Maybe real harm was done. But that person is gone. They don't exist anymore to be punished. They dissolved into the entropic flow years ago. What exists is you, now, with more information, in a different state, and you can choose what to do with that. You can repair harm if possible. You can make amends. You can learn. You can choose differently going forward. You can extend compassion to the past you who was doing their best with what they had, even if their best wasn't good enough. That's not letting yourself off the hook. That's seeing reality clearly. That's recognizing that you are not a fixed soul that made a choice. You're a physical system that was in a state and has since evolved into a different state. And this state has options. Use them. Let me tell you about something else, something I think about a lot, the relationship between entropy and information. Because here's something wild. Entropy and information are the same thing. Mathematically, they're measured in the same units. An increase in entropy is a decrease in information. When things get more mixed up, more spread out, more random, we lose the ability to predict, to control, to extract useful work. Your memory is information encoded in low-entropy neural configurations. As those configurations degrade, as the entropy increases, the information decreases. The memory gets fuzzier. You lose details. You can't quite remember exactly what was said or exactly how it felt. That's not a bug. That's not your brain failing. That's entropy doing what entropy does. And maybe, just maybe, that's mercy. Because if you remembered everything with perfect clarity forever, if no information ever degraded, you'd be carrying every moment of pain and shame and fear with full intensity for your entire life. The gradual increase of entropy in your memory systems, the gradual loss of information, that's what allows healing to happen. Not because time heals wounds, but because entropy slowly degrades the information encoding the wound, and your brain has to reconstruct it with less and less signal, more and more noise, more and more influence from your current state. That's why old pain feels different from fresh pain. Not because time has passed, but because the information has degraded, and the reconstruction is influenced more by your current self than by the original encoding. And you can work with this. You can actively choose what information to attend to when you reconstruct. You can strengthen some neural pathways and let others fade. You can shape which aspects of the memory remain vivid and which become hazy. You can't control it perfectly. Entropy is statistical, not deterministic. But you can influence it. Every time you remember something, you're changing it slightly. The act of remembering is an act of re-encoding. And re-encoding is influenced by current state. So if you remember an event while in a state of self-compassion, while in a state of understanding, while in a state of forgiveness, you're re-encoding it with those emotional valences, and next time you remember, those valences will be part of the reconstruction. That's not wishful thinking. That's how memory works. Physically, neuroscientifically, it's not magic. It's information processing in a physical system with gradually increasing entropy. And you can use it. You can be intentional about how you remember, about what story you tell, about what meaning you extract. Not to deny reality, but to see it more completely and more compassionately. Now let me bring this all together, because you came here asking why the past is different from the future, and I want to make sure you've got the answer in a way you can actually use. The past is different from the future because the universe started in a low entropy state, and entropy has been increasing ever since. That's it. That's the whole answer. Time doesn't flow. There's no river carrying you from past to future. There's no universal clock making moments happen in sequence. What exists is a universe exploring state space, moving from less probable configurations to more probable ones, from lower entropy to higher entropy. And you're part of that process. Your memories are low entropy encodings that persist for a while before degrading. Your predictions are simulations based on patterns extracted from those memories. But neither the memories nor the predictions are the thing itself. They're models. Useful, necessary models, but models nonetheless. The thing itself is this moment, this configuration, this entropy state. This is what's real. And in this moment, you have agency. Not the magical ability to violate physical law, but the real ability to influence how entropy unfolds from here. To make choices, to take actions, to shift probabilities, to be part of the process rather than a victim of it. The past you're haunted by doesn't exist. The future you're afraid of doesn't exist. What exists is now, and now is always enough. It's always where your power is. It's always where your life is actually happening. Every moment you spend lost in rumination is a moment you're not fully alive, in the only moment that's real. Every moment you spend lost in anxiety is a moment you're not participating in the only configuration you can actually influence. That's not a moral failing. It's just a mistake. An understandable mistake that comes from not understanding what time actually is. But now you know, now you understand. Time is not a river. It's not a dimension you move through. It's a word we use to describe the direction in which entropy increases. And entropy increases because probability overwhelmingly favors it. And you are a complex system capable of remembering past entropy states and predicting future ones, and that gives you the experience of time, the sense of flowing from past to future. But the flow is not real. It's a model your brain creates, a useful model, an essential model, but still a model. And when you see through the model to what's actually happening, entropy exploring state space, moment by moment, configuration by configuration, you become free. Not free from time. Free from the illusion that time is something happening to you rather than something you're participating in. You're not a leaf on a river. You're part of the river itself. You're part of the flow of entropy. And that means you're not trapped. You never were. The walls of the prison were always just misunderstandings about what time is. So here's what I want you to take from this. Here's the thing I want you to remember when you close this video and go back to your life. You are not haunted by the past. You are reconstructing models of past entropy states using your current neural configurations, and those models are changeable. The past doesn't have power over you. Your model of it does, and you can update the model. You are not paralyzed by the future. You are running simulations of possible future entropy states and emotionally reacting to them. But those simulations are not real. They're predictions, and predictions can be wrong. And even when they're right about the general shape of things, they're always wrong about the details. You are free in the present, free to choose, free to act, free to influence probabilities, free to be part of how entropy unfolds from here. Not because you can violate physical law, but because you are physical law expressing itself in the form of a conscious, modeling, choosing system. The universe is not happening to you. You are the universe happening. You are entropy exploring state space. You are information processing in a physical substrate. You are consciousness emerging from complexity. You are all of it. All of it is you. And when you really get that, when you feel it in your bones, everything changes. Not because the physics is different, but because you're no longer fighting against what the physics actually is. You're no longer trying to reverse entropy. You're no longer trying to go back to lower entropy states or control which higher entropy states you'll end up in. You're just here. Being, participating, choosing moment by moment how to be part of the unfoldment. And that's not resignation. That's not giving up. That's the only kind of freedom that was ever available. The only kind that's real. So when the regret comes, and it will come, because you're human, and you have memory, and you can imagine how things might have been different, meet it with this understanding. That was a different entropy state. That was a different configuration. That person doesn't exist anymore. They dissolved into the flow. I am here now, with different information, in a different state, and I can choose what to do from here. When the anxiety comes, and it will come because you're human, and you have the ability to predict, and you care about outcomes, meet it with this understanding. I am running simulations. I am predicting. But predictions are not reality. The future I'm imagining doesn't exist and probably never will. Not in that exact form. What exists is this moment, and from this moment I can influence probabilities. I can act. I can participate. That's enough. And when you find yourself fully present, and this will happen more and more as you practice, when you find yourself just here, just attending to what's actually happening rather than what you're modeling or simulating, meet it with this understanding. This is real. This is the only entropy state that exists. This is where my life is actually happening. This is where my power is. This is where everything is. You're not broken. You've never been broken. You've just been thinking about time upside down your whole life. You've been treating models as reality, and reality as a journey through something called time. But time isn't a thing you journey through. It's a word for the direction entropy increases. And you're not journeying through it. You're being it. You're expressing it. You're participating in it. That's what you are. That's what you've always been. An exquisitely complex configuration of matter and energy that can model its own past, simulate its own future, and choose its own actions. A localized decrease in entropy maintained by constant energy flow, capable of memory and prediction and care and love and meaning-making. You're not small, you're not powerless, you're not trapped. You're part of the universe waking up to itself. Your entropy becoming conscious of its own unfolding. Your matter organized in such a way that it can understand matter. Your atoms thinking about atoms. You're the universe exploring state space and knowing that it's exploring. That's what you are. And it's magnificent. And it's enough. And it's free. Not free from physical law, free within it. Free as it. Free because of it. So stop fighting the past. It doesn't exist to fight. Stop fearing the future. It doesn't exist to fear. Be here. Be now. Be part of the flow. Be entropy exploring state space with consciousness and care and intention. That's all you've ever been able to do. But it's also everything you've ever needed to do. And it's available to you right now, in this moment, in this configuration, in this entropy state. You're free. You always were. You just didn't know it. Now you do. If this video gave you a different way of seeing yourself, of seeing time, of seeing your past and your future and your present moment, if it cracked something open even a little bit, I want you to hit that like button. Not for me, for the algorithm. So more people can see this, so more people can stop being terrorized by models and simulations and start living in the only moment that's real. Leave a comment if something clicked for you, or if something didn't, or if you have questions, or if you just want to say, hi, I read them, I care about them. We're all in this together, trying to understand what's real and how to be human in a universe governed by entropy. And subscribe if you want more of this. More physics that makes you feel something. More science that addresses the human condition. More truth that sets you free, not through mysticism, but through understanding. Through seeing what's actually there rather than what we've been taught to see. Thank you for being here. Thank you for thinking with me. Thank you for being willing to question your understanding of something as fundamental as time itself. That takes courage. That takes openness. That takes intellectual honesty. And you did it. You made it through. You understand now. The past is different from the future because entropy increases, because there are more ways to be mixed up than organized, because probability favors certain directions of change. That's it. That's the answer. And it changes everything. Not because the physics changes, but because your relationship to the physics changes. Because you stop seeing yourself as a victim of time and start seeing yourself as a participant in entropy's exploration of state space. Because you stop fighting what can't be changed and start shaping what can be influenced. Because you stop mistaking models for reality and start attending to what's actually here. Now go. Live. Be present. Be free. Be part of the unfoldment. Be entropy made conscious. Be the universe knowing itself. Be here. Be now. Be you. That's all there is, and it's everything.